Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been working as a consultant in London for over a decade now. It's a challenging job, but I love it. The thrill of helping businesses solve their problems and grow is what gets me out of bed every morning. My best mate and I work for the same firm, and we've been through thick and thin together. A few weeks ago, I landed a meeting with a potential client who could have been a game changer for our company. I was excited and nervous all at once. To make a good impression, I decided to book a table at this fancy restaurant in Soho. It's one of those places where you need to book weeks in advance, especially for Friday lunches. The day of the meeting arrived and I met my potential client outside the restaurant. We were both on time, but the hostess made us wait for nearly 20 minutes before seating us. I tried to keep the conversation flowing, but I could tell my client was getting annoyed. When we finally got to our table, things went from bad to worse. Our waiter was a real piece of work. He looked down his nose at us and acted like we didn't know the first thing about wine. I suggested we have the Cabernet Sauvignon, but the waiter questioned my choice, implying it was too bold for our meal selection. When I asked for his recommendation, he condescendingly suggested something more appropriate for our palates. I could feel my cheeks burning. This guy was treating us like we were clueless kids who'd wandered into the wrong restaurant. The food came out, and my client's meal was practically cold. When we asked for it to be reheated, the waiter reacted as if we'd insulted his mother. He questioned if there was a problem with the meal, and when my client explained it was cold and asked for it to be reheated, the waiter sighed dramatically. He reluctantly agreed, but not before suggesting that our conversation might have allowed the perfectly prepared dish to cool. I wanted to crawl under the table. My client was getting more frustrated by the minute, and I could see my chances of landing this deal slipping away. Soon after, my client made an excuse about needing to return to the office due to something coming up. I politely acknowledged his need to leave and thanked him for his time. After my client left, I called for the manager. I explained everything that had gone wrong and asked if they could comp the meal or at least give us a discount. The manager refused, citing their policy that the full bill must be paid. When I protested about the terrible service and my client leaving early because of it, the manager suggested I choose a more suitable establishment next time. I was fuming as I paid the bill. On my way back to the office, I started hatching a plan. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. When I got back, I gathered my colleagues around. I told them I needed their help with something. When they asked what was up, I explained my plan. I asked them to start booking tables at that restaurant for the Friday 2 weeks from now, using different last names. I pointed out that since they don't take phone numbers, the restaurant wouldn't be able to confirm the bookings. My colleagues looked at me like I was mad, but they agreed to help. Over the next week, we booked nearly every table in that restaurant for that Friday lunch. 2 weeks later, I took a walk past the restaurant during their busiest hour. The place was practically empty. The hostess was frantically flipping through her reservation book, and I could see the manager arguing with the waitstaff. As I walked by, I did some quick math in my head and realized that my little stunt had probably cost them thousands of pounds in lost business. Was it petty? Maybe. But it felt good to know that they'd think twice before treating their customers like dirt again. I served in the army for 8 years, including 2 tours in Afghanistan. During my second tour, I was caught in an explosion that left me with a traumatic brain injury and partial hearing loss in my left ear. It's been a struggle adjusting to civilian life since then, but I've been managing. One of the biggest challenges I face is sensory overload in crowded places. It can be overwhelming, and sometimes I need to shut everything out to stay calm. That's why I always carry noise-canceling earbuds with me. They're a lifesaver when things get too intense. So, there I was, standing in line at the grocery store. It had been a long day, and I was feeling pretty drained. The store was packed, and the noise was starting to get to me. I decided to put in my earbuds and turn on some calming music to help me get through the checkout process. As I was waiting, I felt someone tapping my shoulder. I turned around and saw a woman mouthing something at me, but I couldn't hear her over my music. I gave her a polite nod and turned back around, assuming she was just trying to get my attention for some trivial reason. A few moments passed, and suddenly I felt another tap, this time more forceful. I turned again, and the woman was glaring at me. I could see her lips moving, but I still couldn't hear what she was saying. I pointed to my earbuds and shook my head, trying to indicate that I couldn't hear her. That's when things took a turn for the worse. The woman's face turned red, and she started gesticulating wildly. I could tell she was yelling even though I couldn't hear her. Not wanting to cause a scene, I turned back around and tried to ignore her. Big mistake. Out of nowhere, I felt a sharp pain in my scalp. The woman had grabbed a fistful of my hair and was yanking hard. The sudden assault caught me off guard, and I stumbled backward, nearly falling over. Instinct took over. Years of combat training kicked in, and before I knew it, I had spun around, breaking her grip on my hair. In one fluid motion, I threw an elbow back, connecting squarely with her face. As she reeled from the impact, I followed up with a swift punch to her stomach. The woman crumpled to the ground, clutching her face and gasping for air. It was only then that I realized what had happened. I quickly pulled out my earbuds, and the cacophony of the store came rushing back. The woman on the ground accused me of assaulting her and threatened to call the police. I explained that she had attacked me first and I was defending myself. The cashier stepped in, confirming my version of events and stating that she had seen the woman grab my hair and yank it hard. The store manager rushed over, looking concerned and confused. He asked what was happening. I explained that the woman had assaulted me and I had defended myself. The woman denied this, claiming that she was just trying to ask me a question and that I had attacked her. The cashier again spoke up, refuting the woman's claims and reiterating that she had seen the woman grab my hair. The store manager then asked the woman if it was true that she had grabbed my hair. The woman tried to justify her actions, saying she was just trying to get my attention because I was ignoring her. I explained about my partial hearing loss and the noise-canceling earbuds. The woman retorted that she couldn't have known about my disability as I looked fine to her. I pointed out that not all disabilities are visible and that it doesn't give anyone the right to put their hands on someone else. The store manager then asked the woman to leave the store, stating that they don't tolerate such behavior. The woman protested, asking about my actions. The manager explained that based on what he'd heard, I was defending myself after she had assaulted me. He threatened to call the police if she didn't leave. The woman got up, still holding her nose, and stormed out of the store. The store manager turned to me with an apologetic look. He asked if I was all right, and I replied that I was okay, just a bit shaken up. The manager then offered my groceries for free as an apology for the incident. I thanked the manager and the cashier for their support. I'll definitely keep pushing forward, one day at a time, grateful for the support of those who do understand. I was always the type to plan ahead. It was during my first semester when we got assigned this big physics project. The professor split us into groups of 5 and we had to conduct an experiment and write individual reports. Now, I'm not gonna lie, physics wasn't my strongest subject, but I was determined to do well. As soon as we got the assignment, I marked the deadline on my calendar and started planning. I knew there was a big varsity week coming up and I didn't want to miss out on the fun. So I decided to buckle down and get my report done early. For weeks I spent every free moment in the library, poring over textbooks and double-checking my calculations. It wasn't easy, but I managed to finish my report a full 2 weeks before the deadline. I submitted it, feeling pretty proud of myself. Then came varsity week. Man, it was a blast. Parties, sports events, you name it. I was having the time of my life, not worrying about that physics report hanging over my head. But then, 2 days before the deadline, I got a call. It was one of my group members. Let's call her Karen. She sounded frantic. She apologized for bothering me and explained that she was really struggling with the report. She asked if I could share mine with her just so she could see how to structure it and present the data. I hesitated but agreed, telling her it was just for reference. Karen thanked me profusely, calling me a lifesaver. Now, I'll admit I was still riding the high from varsity week. My judgment wasn't exactly at its best, so I sent her my report thinking I was just helping out a classmate. The next night, my phone rang again. It was Karen. She apologized for bugging me again and asked if I could proofread her report. She said she just wanted a quick once-over before submitting it. I agreed and told her to send it over. When I opened the document, I couldn't believe my eyes. This wasn't just similar to my report. It was my report, word for word, data for data. She had copied the whole thing. I was furious. How could she be so stupid? So disrespectful. I had put weeks of hard work into that report, and she thought she could just steal it. That's when an idea hit me. A petty, vengeful idea that I'm not particularly proud of, but man, did it feel good at the time. I opened up the find and replace function and went to town. Every instance of experiment became doo-doo. Physics turned into unicorn farts. Then I replaced our methodology with a recipe for spaghetti bolognese. The data table, box scores from the weekend's football games. And for the final touch, I rewrote her conclusion as a full confession of attempted plagiarism. I sent it back to her, fully expecting an angry call within minutes. But nothing came. Not that night, not the next day, not for 3 whole weeks. When the call finally came, Karen was hysterical. She demanded to know what I had done to her report. She told me that the faculty had called her in for academic misconduct and were threatening to expel her. I was shocked and asked if she had actually submitted the report I sent her. Karen confirmed that she had, saying she had trusted me. I pointed out that she had trusted me enough to steal my entire report. She hung up after that. I later found out that, in her panic, she had tried to blame me for the report's content, inadvertently admitting to the attempted plagiarism in the process. 5 years later, when I returned to the university as a research fellow, I discovered the story had taken on a life of its own. Every year, freshmen would gather in the lecture hall, and there on the big screen would be Karen's report, complete with spaghetti bolognese recipe and Harry Potter references in the bibliography. The director never revealed our names, but he always ended the presentation with a statement about how the person who wrote this was now a respected member of their research faculty, while the person who tried to pass it off as their own never finished their degree. After spending years in customer service dealing with all sorts of people, I figured I'd seen it all. But let me tell you, nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced the other day. When I lost my job at a big retail chain during the economic downturn, with bills piling up and no prospects in sight, I was desperate for any kind of work. That's when a friend mentioned an opening at the local clinic. Sure, I didn't have any medical experience, but they needed someone to handle the front desk and manage appointments. My years of dealing with difficult customers suddenly became my golden ticket. Fast forward a few months, and I was settling into my new role nicely. The staff was friendly, the work was steady, and most patients were pleasant enough. But then came the day that would test every ounce of patience I cultivated over the years. It was a Tuesday afternoon when they walked in. A middle-aged couple looking like they'd just stepped out of a country club brochure. The woman was clutching her handbag, like it might sprout wings and fly away, while her husband strutted in like he owned the place. I greeted them politely and asked how I could help. The woman responded first, her voice dripping with barely concealed irritation. She said they were there for her husband's appointment and demanded to speak to someone about his test results immediately. I checked the system and saw that the husband indeed had an appointment scheduled, but something about their demeanor set off alarm bells in my head. I informed them that I would check them in and mentioned their appointment was in about 15 minutes. I then asked which test results they were inquiring about. The husband replied forcefully, saying he wanted all of them. He explained he had been there yesterday for blood work and needed those results now. His tone made it clear he wasn't used to waiting for anything. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay professional. I tried to explain that while some results were already in, others would take a few days to process as per standard procedure. Before I could finish, the man's face turned red. He interrupted me, demanding to know if I knew who he was and insisting he didn't have time for standard procedures. He demanded to see all his results immediately. His voice had risen to a shout, drawing concerned looks from other patients in the waiting room. I tried to calm him down, explaining that we couldn't rush the lab work, but he wasn't having any of it. The woman chimed in, asking what kind of clinic we were running. I attempted to reassure them, suggesting they could speak with our nurse about the available results. The husband reacted angrily, complaining that a nurse had called him about his other results and insisting he should be talking to the doctor directly. By this point, other staff members had noticed the commotion. Our head nurse approached, trying to defuse the situation. She attempted to explain that our nurses were highly qualified to discuss results, and that if there was anything concerning, the doctor would certainly be involved. The husband, however, had reached his limit. He declared he'd had enough of our incompetence. To my utter disbelief, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Yes, you heard that right. He called the police because his lab results weren't ready fast enough. The next 20 minutes were pure chaos. The couple continued to rant and rave, disturbing other patients and making wild accusations about our clinic's practices. When the police finally arrived, I thought surely this madness would end. The officer asked what the problem was. Before anyone from our staff could explain, the husband launched into a tirade about how we were withholding his medical information and discriminating against him. Our manager stepped forward, trying to calmly explain the situation to the officer, but to my shock and dismay, the cop interrupted her, saying he needed to hear from the patient first and couldn't just take her word for it. I watched as the officer listened patiently to the couple's wildly exaggerated account of events. It felt like we were living in some sort of twisted reality where common sense had taken a vacation. After what seemed like an eternity, the officer finally turned back to us. He said that he understood the situation now and that it seemed there had been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? That was the understatement of the century. The officer spoke to the couple for a few more minutes, explaining that calling the police for non-emergency matters like this wasn't appropriate. To their credit, they at least had the decency to look somewhat embarrassed. But karma, as they say, has a way of balancing things out. As the couple turned to leave, the woman's handbag slipped from her grasp. Its contents spilled across the floor, revealing an assortment of prescription bottles from other clinics. The husband's face paled as he scrambled to help his wife gather their things. It was clear from the labels that they'd been shopping for medications at multiple clinics, a practice that's not only frowned upon but potentially dangerous. Our head nurse simply raised an eyebrow and suggested scheduling a follow-up appointment to discuss all of their current medications. The couple couldn't get out of there fast enough after that. We'd weathered the storm, and in the end, their own actions had exposed their true colors. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.